At the annual trooping of the colour ceremony, the king abandoned riding on horseback and rode in a carriage. In 1951, the truth of the king's condition could not be hidden, as he returned early from a Scottish holiday for treatment. Just 56 years old, he had the appearance of a man 20 years older. Anxious crowds gathered outside the palace where news bulletins were posted. Ex-King Edward returned to London. The military bands that marched outside the palace muffled their instruments. The treatment was officially called a lung resection. The king had lung cancer, and one lung was removed. But the tumour had spread. The king would die. This news was not told to the British people, and the nation shared in the Queen's self-delusion that the king would make a full recovery.
I'm very grateful indeed for your welcome and for your kind reference to the king. I'm glad to say that he continues to make most excellent progress.
It was Queen Elizabeth's strength that she was always cheerful and optimistic. It came at a price. She was called an emotional ostrich. Those that know her have said what she doesn't want to see, she doesn't look at. People that needed her couldn't always get her help. When Princess Elizabeth and Philip took the place of the King and Queen on a tour of Canada in 1951, they travelled with black mourning clothes and the papers needed for her to be declared Queen. It is possible to see the seriousness on this trip that made George VI's daughter a target of criticism for not smiling enough. But this young woman knows her father is dying. The king was ill again over the Christmas of 1951. In the new year of 1952, the king was to tour East Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. Elizabeth and Philip went in his stead. On the 31st of January 1952, they flew to Kenya. Those who knew the king said they had never seen the king so distressed at their parting. As he saw Elizabeth turn on the steps of the plane, it was the last time he would ever lay eyes on his beloved daughter. And it was the last time George VI was seen in public. The king died 6 days later while asleep of a thrombosis. The British people had not been told of his illness. The news was devastating. The king died too young, before his time, adored by his two great passions in life, his family and the British people. As George lay in state, the queues of those wishing to just walk past his coffin were stupefying to the imagination. Ex-King Edward attended the funeral, hoping for reconciliation and a return to the family fold. But the Windsor women closed ranks, and he was not even invited to eat with them. Edward spoke with his mother, Queen Mary, and his brother's widow, now titled Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. He wrote to Wallace that while there was sugar on the surface, there was granite underneath. George VI's wife would never forgive Edward and Wallace for destroying her family life, both forcing her husband onto the throne and into an early grave. The model of royalty, the leadership that George and Elizabeth gave the British people, took Britain through the darkest times of history. In George and Elizabeth for a short time, the public image of the monarchy met reality and created a royal family that was what Britain wanted and Britain needed. Elizabeth lived on for more than half a century. On her death, people talked of the end of an era, of things never being the same again, of Britain changing forever. The strength and success of what George and Elizabeth built was at the same time a burden to those that followed, a load made heavier by changing times. The model they created, and that was followed by their daughter, was too perfect. It belonged to a time where deference and respect were automatic, and the media kept their distance. Without deference and distance, it failed. How George and Elizabeth in old age would have met the challenges of the 1960s and 70s and those of the 1980s, when the model of royal family life disintegrated into chaos, is pure speculation. Yet the truth remains that George and Elizabeth were in the right place, at the right time for the British people. George VI could have passed into history a forgotten king, whose reign and life passed quietly by in an unremarkable succession of uneventful years. Fate did not allow him that life. Instead, he is an unforgettable and quite remarkable figure in British history. George VI and his queen were a good king and queen, a great king and queen, and above all, the right king and queen for their time.